Okay, we are on. Let me double check on Facebook. There we go. Okay.
Yay!
Hi, everyone. It is finally the day that we have been waiting for. I have Whitney Morgan here. I've been talking about her just at length because she is so amazing. It was so influential in my early part of my career as an FDN and as a mentor to me, and answered all of the hard questions and continues to answer all the hard questions. And she was actually one of the first creators of one of the first continuing education courses that I took with FDN for the thyroid, advanced thyroid course. So Whitney is loaded with knowledge. And today we're going to touch on thyroid a bit, but we're really going to talk about food sensitivities and gluten sensitivity and how this all relates and interconnects with our healing with the core and pelvic floor, weight loss. We are all interconnected. And this is one of those big rocks that I'm always talking to you about the power of dealing with these issues from the inside out. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let Whitney tell you a little bit about herself and her background and what she does.
Sure. Well, thanks. And thanks for having me on, Amy, and welcome everybody. I'm so glad to be here. So I am a functional nutrition practitioner. I am also a certified gluten-free coach, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist. And I really came to the alternative health world, like so many of us, through my personal healing journey, having gone to medical doctor after medical doctor and not getting any answers, just getting more diagnoses, right, and more prescriptions, and never really getting better. So I just reached a turning point in my life, and I just walked away from all of that and decided I needed to get the skills to heal myself. And so I went to acupuncture school. I went to the functional diagnostic nutrition program, did a couple of other things, and here I am. And the long and short of it is, I really specialize in women struggling with autoimmune disease. Most of them are struggling with thyroid disorders plus other things, right? And I further focused on gluten sensitivity and celiac disease because in my clinical experience, and I'm talking, over a decade of work, practically every single autoimmune person has an underlying gluten sensitivity. Most of the time it's gone unrecognized because they don't have the classic symptoms that the traditional medical world associates with gluten sensitivity. So I kind of keep a couple of balls in the air, gluten sensitivity and autoimmune disease. And that's really my focus.
That's great. And that, I think, is a good starting point for questions. What does encompass autoimmune disease? What are some common autoimmune diseases that we see?
Oh gosh. Well, certainly Hashimoto's is probably the most common autoimmune disease, particularly among women. And actually, most women who have just been diagnosed with hypothyroidism actually have Hashimoto's. They just haven't been diagnosed. But then there are things like psoriasis and scleroderma, rheumatoid arthritis, certainly type 1 diabetes, Sjogren's, lots of things that are being reclassified actually as autoimmune diseases, even things like heart disease, right? But multiple sclerosis, and there are other kinds of neurological autoimmune diseases. But these are just kind of like the handful of the most well-known. But autoimmune disease is really just about location, right? It's where is the tissue damage occurring, but it doesn't really, that diagnosis of whatever autoimmune disease you have doesn't tell you anything about the underlying cause, right? And in the functional world, what we know is that though the location may be different depending on your diagnosis, the underlying root cause of autoimmune disease is pretty consistent across the board.
Interesting. That I think that's a big takeaway that y'all are listening, that it doesn't matter where it's located, the underlying roots are what we're most concerned with. So we're hoping tonight to give you some of those roots that you can come away with, and Whitney is definitely the person to do it. So Tonight, we're talking specifically about food sensitivities and gluten sensitivity, and you've offered a ton of freebies. So, guys, if you haven't checked out Whitney's content, I posted all the links today in the group. So, head back over there and take advantage of that. She also has an amazing course that you can access that I learned a ton from. And I am a practitioner, and I had no idea about all this information, and it's been massively useful to me. So, you do not have to have celiac disease to take advantage of these
Mm,
resources. So,
right.
first and foremost, can we do anything to prevent food sensitivities?
Absolutely. But it all starts with the gut, right?
Mhm.
So, in order to get a food sensitivity, unless you're born with a particular allergy, right? That's different. But a food sensitivity usually comes from, you know, you having some gut damage, some gut inflammation, and what we call intestinal permeability. Once you've got a sustained intestinal permeability or leaky gut, what happens is lots of things get through, and usually we're talking about large, undigested or partially digested food proteins leak through the gut barrier, which should not happen. They get into the bloodstream and they kind of go systemic. And then our immune system, which is always on patrol, recognizes these food proteins as enemies and then tags them with immunoglobulins so that the next time we eat them, it provokes an immune response and we have a food sensitivity. Now, you may not know that you have a food sensitivity. You could be walking around with 10, 15, 20 different food sensitivities and have no idea because the symptoms are so systemic and pervasive and not necessarily immediate when you consume the food. It might take 3, 4, 5 days for symptoms to really emerge.
Wow, that's so powerful that it could take that many days. And then we actually lose the connection because we're eating so many different things to
Exactly.
what the trigger was. I know that
Exactly.
Whitney definitely speaks the truth because I was sensitive to both salmon and avocado and excuse me, salmon and garlic. And I didn't realize that I was eating those all the time because they're healthy for you. They're
Hmm.
superfoods. But when I took them out and I added them back in, I realized that mine was more neurological. It was cognitive. It was mood related
Right.
connection. It wasn't specific to the gut. So you don't really know.
Right, and
Our
that's usually what happens is you become sensitive to the foods that you're eating the most of, right?
Yeah.
And so to dive deeper into your question, in order to avoid getting food sensitivities, it's really about avoiding that leaky gut. It's maintaining the healthiest gut environment that we can. And in order to do that, I mean, that crosses several different avenues, like not eating foods that are inflammatory to the gut. There are certain foods that we consume on a daily basis that literally break down the gut lining. And so they make us more vulnerable to leaky gut. But there are other things like, burning the candle at both ends, not getting enough
Mhm.
sleep, overwork, over exercise, under exercise, a lot of emotional or mental stress in your life. I mean, there's various things that will compromise the immune function in the gut, compromise the microfloral balance, create inflammation, and leave us super vulnerable to leaky gut. So it's not just one thing, it's a
Mhm.
perfect storm of variables that creates this leaky gut.
That's really powerful information because we're talking about prevention, that
Hmm.
shows that it's not, you can't just take a pill to
Right.
prevent them, or just even eating a varied diet. It's a lifestyle. It's pretty much all of these inputs,
Hmm.
and knowing that these stressors can be coming from environmental stressors, from toxins, from emotional, but then also from mechanical stressors, from systemic dysfunction physically, like if you
Yeah,
have any pelvic floor or any kind of core dysfunction, pain patterns, that all drives stress, which can induce a leaky
absolutely.
gut for sure.
Hmm.
So food sensitivities, sometimes they become more common in different stages of life. Would you
Right.
say that pregnancy or postpartum could induce a food sensitivity? Is that a state when the gut becomes more leaky, or is it prone
It's
to?
certainly a time in life where you're more vulnerable. And the reason for that is because you have this natural confluence of different variables. Pregnancy is a physical stressor, right?
Mhm.
Labor is a physical stressor. I mean, it is kind of a physical trauma to the body. And so in our postpartum time, we are in this time of post trauma and healing, right? So that's a chronic stress on the body, and that can leave the gut vulnerable. But also, what's happening when you've got a new child? You're not sleeping, right?
That's right.
And you're completely exhausted. Most women who are on that other side are also dealing with some chronic nutrient deficiencies, right? So you have all these different variables that, like planets aligning perfectly,
Mhm.
that can create an environment for a leaky gut and then set the stage for more food sensitivities postpartum.
That's really interesting. So that's a time when it's really important in the prenatal and in the natal period to be really monitoring nutrition, not only
Mhm.
for the health of the baby but preparing for that postpartum period to help to prevent, because knowing that this can affect neuro our neurology, our mood, our
Yes.
neurotransmitters for sure, because the gut is the home of the second brain, right? The enteric nervous
Right.
system is there. That can
Right.
really play a role in postpartum depression as well. Um,
Yeah.
Now, tell me this. Do food sensitivities affect weight loss? Can we lose weight if we have
Sure.
food sensitivities?
You mean if you get rid of the foods that you're sensitive to?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So this is kind of a complex question because you don't have to be sensitive to certain foods for those foods to contribute to weight gain. For instance, wheat is a big offender when it comes to inhibiting fat burning. So wheat, grains, high lectin foods. Lectins are part of a lot of different plants, but they're very dominant in the grain and legume world. And lectins damage the gut lining. They get through the gut lining, and they actually are insulin mimickers. They dock into insulin cell receptors, and they disrupt the messaging, and they actually tell your body to store fat. So, hey, all those carbs or that extra protein you're eating, that's going to get stored as triglycerides, right? And your body's going to hold on to it because of this signaling, this hormone signaling disruption. So there's a reason why we feed our livestock grains, right? It's a perfect way to fatten us up. They're high lectin foods.
Right.
Now, add on top of that, if you're sensitive to these foods, that just compounds the problem. There are certain peptides of these foods that actually increase fat storage when you have an immune response to them. You know, one that comes to mind is the amylase and protease inhibitors in wheat. If your immune system doesn't like those, which is very, very common, you're
Mhm.
going to be more prone to hold on to fat. And also, anytime you have food sensitivities, that creates more inflammation in the body, and it actually shifts the body into that state of chronic stress, right? Where our body is trying to pump out more cortisol, it's dysregulating our blood sugar, and all of that holds weight on the body, right? And it keeps us from accessing those fat stores to burn them. And so what you wind up doing is dieting and getting on that treadmill more, and the weight isn't budging, and part of that is because your body's in a state of chronic stress.
Wow, that's so our morning Ezekiel bread and
Yeah.
with our nut butter is maybe not
Hmm.
doing us as much of a favor as
Right.
it could be. And especially if you're doing like a lot of wheat products and you're over exercising, like if you're training hard, or
Mm-hmm.
even the opposite is you're under exercising and your body's under stress because it's out of shape, and you're doing a
Sure.
lot of the wheat products because they're recommended as healthy whole grains. You likely are setting yourself up for a lot of dysfunction. That's really
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. Particularly those whole grains, because the whole grains are loaded with lectins, and the lectins are probably the one compound in those foods that keep us fat, basically, keep us heavy.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really really interesting and so powerful. So, um Do these food sensitivities affect the thyroid as well? We talked a little bit about
Mhm.
Hashimoto's, but what if we weren't diagnosed with Hashimoto's?
Sure. So, yes, food sensitivities impact the thyroid, but predominantly it's a wheat issue and it's a lectin issue. Again, I mean, that's why these foods are so destructive. So, the research shows us that there's almost 100% correlation between Hashimoto's and wheat sensitivity.
Mm,
Now, most women don't know this, so it's not like everyone who has Hashimoto's automatically goes wheat and gluten free. They don't. But
right.
if you test that population, that's that you find this almost 100% correlation between this. Um, and what happens is, particularly the lectin in wheat, it has a real affinity for the thyroid. So not only does it break down the gut lining, but it gets through the gut lining, it travels through the bloodstream. It really likes the thyroid, and it's a sticky protein, and it attaches itself to the thyroid tissue. Then your immune system comes out and says, "Oh, wait a minute, that doesn't belong there," right? Start shooting at it. And so your thyroid tissue gets destroyed as collateral damage. And when that happens, now your thyroid tissue is tagged. It's tagged as gluten or as wheat germ. So now your immune system just attacks your thyroid because it thinks that it's the same, bad guy that lectin was. It's called molecular mimicry. The
Wow.
the tissue looks very similar to the immune system. So then you're off to the races with autoimmune thyroid disease.
That's so powerful. So if you remove the wheat, can that reverse
Mhm.
that? Can that reverse that
Well,
autoimmune?
it's that's a good question. It really depends on how much tissue
Mm,
damage has been done at that time. What I can say is that you may not be able to restore the thyroid to its original function. But if you remove all of those triggers, you can calm the immune system down. You can stop the progression of the autoimmune disease. And if you put the right foundational support in place, which
mhm.
includes, you know, supplements that have modulating impacts on the immune system, really support Treg cell production, things like that, then you can keep the immune system calm and properly modulated, and you can support your thyroid the way it needs to be supported, and really keep your need for medication to the lowest place possible, right? You
Mm,
may not ever be able to go back to not being on medication, but I think the goal is let's keep that dose as low as we possibly can, right? And
right.
let's halt the progression. That's really the important question.
That's so powerful and so interesting.
Mhm.
So we talked a little bit before about being able to sometimes we don't have digestive symptoms
Hmm.
when we
Yeah.
have food sensitivities or we have gluten sensitivity. What are some other symptoms that we have? And I'm gonna let you start answering it and pull my blinds too, because the
Oh,
lines
sure.
look
Yeah,
bigger
yeah, yeah,
than
yeah,
I'm enough.
yeah.
Okay, way
Um,
back.
Wow. So the symptoms, what's really interesting is that when it comes to gluten sensitivity, most people think of gas and bloating and constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, those kinds of things. But actually, the most predominant symptoms of wheat and gluten sensitivity and food sensitivities overall are extra intestinal. They occur outside the intestines, right? Which makes sense because these food proteins are getting through, going into the bloodstream, right? So that's where the battle is raging. So it can be anything from migraines or chronic headaches, anxiety, panic disorders, depression, let's see,
Mm,
ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, spectrum disorders, sensory disorders. So that's a bunch of neurological stuff, right? Cognitive decline, difficulty concentrating. So there's a lot of brain interaction that goes on with food sensitivities. And then joint pain is a big one. Muscle stiffness, muscle pain, joint pain, any issues in the skin, right? Eczema, psoriasis, those little bumps on the back of people's arms that we
mhm.
call chicken skin, that's classic, right? So anything that manifests in the skin. Um, and really any sort of sensory pain, so peripheral neuropathy, numbness, tingling in the extremities, stuff like that. I mean, the list is almost endless. And then there's other things like infertility or a history of miscarriages. That's a big red flag. So are things like well, any autoimmune disorder. Doesn't matter what your diagnosis. That's kind of a red flag for food sensitivities and gluten sensitivity.
Mm.
And failure to thrive as a kid. If you're the littlest kid in the class and don't put on weight, that's kind of a red flag too. So the list is pretty long.
Wow, that's almost overwhelming, but it's
Yeah,
also really powerful because it gives us, some information on other alternatives. If we've gone to doctors and have these issues and not had any resolution to our issues or to our issues with our children, if
right.
we've been told the only possibility is to be put on Ritalin,
Yeah.
or to be put on some sort of other medication
Hmm.
to help with their balance, or if our child has been diagnosed with diabetes or anything like that,
Yes.
then those are really big things that are not usually brought up. It's just talk about counseling or anything like that, which is good, but it doesn't really talk about what the underlying driver that
Right.
they could still be doing on a regular basis. So guys, those of you who are watching, feel free to just ask a question. You can just drop it into the comments, and I will be sure to ask Whitney. I know that we're talking about children. I had a question come in anonymously to me today, and this
Mm,
mom was talking about her sons, who both of them seem to get upset tummies sometimes, but she
yeah.
doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know even where to start, because going gluten free, especially in today's environment, seems very difficult and overwhelming to her,
Mm,
and doesn't know even what step number one is, because the doctors have told her that they need these foods to grow,
hmm.
and specifically calcium in the dairy, and then they
Hmm.
need the carbohydrates, and the only way you're going to get it is through bread and cereal and
Right.
pasta. And what can she do? What's a good starting point for these moms, because I know she's not alone.
Right. Well, I think the first thing to do, speaking as a mom myself,
Mhm.
is to test.
Yeah.
Run the right tests on your children to find out what are the things that they are uniquely sensitive to. You can't, some people do elimination diets, but you're really relying on your ability to correlate symptoms with food, which is very, very difficult to do. So I don't recommend elimination diets. I recommend testing. So I use Vibrant Wellness testing. They do have finger prick options, so you don't have to put your kids through a blood draw. And that way you're testing them for all of the big offenders, not just wheat, but also dairy and corn and grains and various lectins and lots of different fruits and vegetables. So you can get a clear sense of what is aggravating your child's immune system, right? Once you have the data, then you can make a plan. Now,
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, when I test clients, adults and children,
Mhm.
most people are gluten and wheat sensitive. It's pervasive.
Yeah.
So maybe not in the healthy population, but people who are coming to you because they have health complaints, it's pretty common. So being open to the idea of going gluten free, I think that's more of a mindset issue. It can be very overwhelming, and that's what I experience with my clients. Is that's probably the toughest part, is that first overwhelm of, oh my God, my life is never going to be the same.
Yeah.
Right? What about birthday cake? What about
Mhm.
Thanksgiving and Christmas, and all of these emotional things come up, and just understanding that actually all of those things can stay, right? And you're not really going to miss out on anything. You're just going to learn how to cook things, make things differently. There are alternatives to everything now.
Right.
But it is a big emotional overwhelm piece that really takes some time to kind of get through and adjust to that.
Right. And you have so many great resources on that, and that um you know Whitney is the person to talk you through that process, like, more than anybody else on the planet that I know. She is the expert on that, because there's so many things and that gluten is in now, that it's
Yeah.
hard to be able to really even sift through that. And that's where it comes in. guys, is like taking advantage of when you find someone like Whitney who's just so well versed and can coach you through that. That is like a gold mine, because you take the pressure off of you, and you basically turn it over to her, and it's like going back to school, but for things that you want to learn, right? Like, so
Right.
that you can immediately integrate and apply into your life. And
Yeah.
then you have the power with that information for the rest of your life. Not only to take care of yourself, if this is you that we're talking about, but for children. It's so challenging and overwhelming if you do receive those test results, which I would say, Whitney, at least in my circles, that it's common for people to resist wanting to take those tests, because then you have that information, you have to act
Right.
on it, you know.
Ignorance is bliss,
It
right?
totally is, and it's
Yeah,
easier
yeah,
just to take a medication, but
yeah,
you'll end up with more symptoms. So I have another
absolutely.
question.
Mhm.
Fibromyalgia, although it's not considered an autoimmune disease technically, which that surprises me that it's not been labeled that. I think it's kind of like IBS. It's one of those catch-all ones.
More of a syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would
Mhm.
that interrelate with food sensitivities and all that kind of we're covering tonight?
Sure. Um, well, food sensitivities, I mean, I don't specialize in fibromyalgia, but I do have patients that have clients that have fibromyalgia along with other things. And what I can tell you is that, the underlying causes of fibro are very similar to the underlying causes of traditional classical autoimmune disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we test and we look at the gut, we look at what pathogens are there, whether it's parasites, bacteria, yeast, whatever, chronic viral loads. And then we look at the food sensitivities, and then we look at the heavy metal toxicity load on the body. Those are kind of like the three big buckets, right? Where most people have issues. When you clean up those things and you start to, eliminate all of the disruption at those levels in people's bodies, then the symptoms start to go away. The
Mm-hmm.
fibromyalgia lessens, it disappears, right? Other things start to reverse. And there's this philosophy in Chinese medicine, and I think it holds true in functional medicine as well. It's called the root branch philosophy. And in Chinese medicine, the human body is thought of like a tree, right? And the symptoms of the disease show up in the branches and the leaves. But the gardener knows that in order to really cure that tree, you have to go to the soil, right? The answer is in the roots, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's down deep. So, and if all you do is spend your time addressing the leaves and the branches, the tree dies. It's not going to regain its vitality. And that's what I'm talking about. And you know this too very well, that
Mm-hmm.
when you focus on, well, what are your underlying root imbalances in your body, right? And if we can identify those and then alleviate those, the symptoms kind of take care of themselves.
Totally.
Hmm.
100% of the time, like
Yeah,
100%. The
100%. Yeah.
the hard thing is it's not immediate, and it requires life
Yes.
change, and that's where this is really difficult.
Right.
So this is very common, very commonly found, is that my doctor ran food sensitivity tests, or an
Yes.
allergy test on me, but I have no allergies to gluten, wheat, or eggs. So am I good, or is there a better test? What do these tests mean?
Yeah, I would say short answer, no. You're
Okay.
not good. For starters, an allergy test is different. A food allergy is like throat closing up, right? Can't breathe, hives, all of that. That's a part of the immune system. That's the 5 alarm fire part of the immune system. So that's a classic allergy. Most people would correlate that with like your peanut allergy, right? That's
Mhm.
life or death stuff. Food sensitivities cannot be identified with food allergy testing. So first off, you have to make sure you're getting the right kind of test. So you want to be looking at IgG and IgA testing for foods, right? But then we also have to talk about the difference between whole food testing and peptide testing.
Mhm.
So you can be negative, like I test negative to the whole protein of corn, But when I test for the peptides of corn, my immune system goes crazy. It lights up like a Christmas tree. So most food sensitivity testing out there is done based on the whole food protein. And in theory, a whole protein of a food should never get through your gut lining because your digestive system should start to break it down, right? It's super, super big. It really shouldn't get through. So you're more likely to develop sensitivities to the smaller, partially digested
Mm,
aspects of the food that you're eating. And those are the peptides. So that's really what you want to look at. They're far more sensitive and far more specific. So if you're getting a test from your regular doctor, a classically trained MD, 90% of the time you're talking about the wrong test. So it doesn't really matter what your results are. It's not the right test. I'm not bashing doctors. I'm just saying that's not the right functional food sensitivity testing if you really want the data specific to you.
right. And that's really powerful information. So the hard thing is that those tests are covered by the doctor because they're ordered
Mm.
by the
Right,
MD, but
right,
tests that we're going to order are going to be out of pocket. But the
right.
trade-off is an investment in your longevity, an investment in
Mhm.
your um like how you feel. I can't get myself in the camera. The how you feel for the rest of your life. These are like powerful things to consider on the flip side of that cost
Oh,
benefit
oh
equation.
yeah.
Like once you have that information, it's yours because when you test for these foods, if you test for gluten sensitivity, is that lifelong if it comes
Yes,
back positive? Okay.
yes.
So that's
Yeah.
not something that you'll have to keep retesting for, correct? For gluten
Well,
sensitivity?
I recommend if people come back with a positive on wheat or gluten sensitivity, I recommend you run the test at least once a year. Not because you're hoping something has changed, like you're suddenly not sensitive anymore,
Mhm.
but because it's so difficult to avoid. And it's so easy for small little micro exposures to sneak through. So I test my clients at least once a year just to make sure that they are as safe as they think they are, right? We can't rely on our symptoms to tell us whether or not we've been contaminated. I have celiac disease. I can have a very, very small micro exposure to wheat and not even know it, right?
Mm.
So the only way I'm going to know if something is sneaking through my defenses in my home is to at least run a test every year just to confirm that everything is okay.
That's really good information to have as well. So you can kind
Yeah,
of plan for that. And then, once you have a coach or a practitioner that you're working with, then you guys can set up a plan or a timeline of when that test will need to be run and
yeah,
you can budget ahead for that.
yeah.
Um, so what are some symptoms tied to just gluten sensitivity? If someone has a gluten sensitivity, are there common symptoms?
Well, I mean, the classic symptoms of celiac or celiac sprue would be those digestive symptoms, right? So that's your pain, your gas, bloating, profuse diarrhea, you're stuck on the toilet for days, that kind of thing. But that's actually a small
Mhm.
percentage of people who are gluten sensitive or who have celiac disease. The majority of symptoms tend to manifest neurologically. So that's the
Mm.
panic, the anxiety, the learning disabilities, the spectrum, the sensory disorders, cognitive decline, right? Foggy thinking, I can't concentrate, all of that, migraine headaches. I mean, everything up in the head is
Mhm.
real red flags for gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. Anemia, so if you're someone who has been told that you just run low on iron and B12 and any sort of nutrient absorption issue like that is a big red flag, as is chronic low vitamin D levels,
Oh, that's
right? Because
interesting.
anyone with gluten sensitivity, they have a real difficulty absorbing vitamin D and absorbing their iron. So any sort of anemia, low iron, low vitamin D, that would be a red flag. And like I talked about before, failure to thrive, littlest kid in the class, right?
Mhm.
Anything on the skin, psoriasis, eczema, all the chicken skin. I mean, basically everything I talked about for food sensitivities overall, that's just classic gluten sensitivity symptoms. So, and also looking at your family history, right? So
Right.
if your mom had rheumatoid arthritis, right, that's a big red flag. If anyone in your family has an autoimmune diagnosis or has
Mhm.
IBS, right, and chronic constipation and some, eczema, or those are red flags. So look around in your family history and see what is there, because gluten sensitivity and celiac disease definitely have a genetic and inherited, component there.
Yes.
So pay attention to your family for sure.
That's super powerful because I have a client whose uh father-in-law had a really significant heart attack, had and then was later diagnosed with celiac disease, and for a long time
Wow. Yeah.
he had psoriasis,
Yes.
and it was near fatal heart attack. His children have eczema,
Yes.
significant eczema, and then his there's also schizophrenia in the family, and
Oh,
there's all different things.
yes.
So if you have
Yes.
someone like that, my recommendation was to then have her children tested,
Hmm.
because they had some mood issues that were, should this have not have been in the family at all, I wouldn't have said, well, why don't we go ahead and test them, because of the mental health issues and then the heart disease and the eczema, that you then tie in those things, are not, that are just, sometimes people notice them as normal kid things, but when
Right.
you play in the history, and that's what functional medicine does, is you take into account that history and you look at that in combination with the risk factors and the tendencies. And sure enough, all of her kids
Yes.
came back with gluten sensitivity as well, and dairy
Absolutely.
sensitivity.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
And that's the
you
way
don't
it
know what you're
shows up in
preventing.
families.
Yeah, you don't know what you're preventing.
Exactly. And so, like, for me, for me it was, I had psoriasis, Hashimoto's, and interstitial cystitis before they ever found my celiac disease. I had 3
Wow.
autoimmune diseases before I got diagnosed with celiac disease. For other people in my family, it's multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, dementia, right?
Hmm.
So for them, that's how they manifested their gluten sensitivity. For me, it was different. And so you can't just look for the same things in your family. You have to look for, everyone has different weak links, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's like a little Sherlock Holmes investigation. You just have to
Yeah.
keep collecting those clues and put it all together.
Yeah, and I think for moms at least,
Mhm.
it's a struggle, because you have the kids, and then
Yeah,
you don't want to face that or have them face that, but it's
yeah,
empowering. And the thing now is, it's not so abnormal as it was once was. It's more
right.
normal now than it was before.
Well,
So,
and I tell you, Amy,
mhm,
one thing I want to mention too is that for the moms out there, if you're a mom with gluten sensitivity or wheat sensitivity, the best thing that you can do for your family is to create a completely gluten-free house. Have everyone go gluten-free. And the moms that I work with are more inclined to go, "Oh, I don't want them to have to give up their favorite foods. I'll just be gluten-free and they can still continue to do what they do." But the thing is that, for us, as adult women, our gluten sensitivity shows up later in life. For
mhm,
our kids, it's going to show up earlier.
yeah,
So where I might get diagnosed in my 30s, my child might wind up with type 1 diabetes at the age of 14. That's Talk about a life changer. That
yeah,
is so much harder than creating a gluten-free house, right? And I get passionate about this because this actually happened to someone in my family.
yeah,
So they're struggling with type 1 diabetes. That is so much harder
it
than
is.
just struggling with being gluten free,
Because
right?
that's
So
not reversible. You
it's
can't.
not
No,
reversible, right?
no,
So let's get into prevention mode,
right.
right? Let's keep our kids from having to walk down the same road that we're walking down now. That's the best thing we can do for them.
Right. Now, we talked about absorption and how this
Yeah.
can really, with the iron and B vitamins and vitamin D. Now, knowing that these are raw materials for our regeneration. Now, we can't rebuild as adults. When we can't regenerate, I misspoke, but we can remodel. So we don't
Yes.
regenerate tissue, we remodel tissue. But even in that remodeling, we're synthesizing a new variant of connective tissue. We're synthesizing a new fascial tissue. And this
Right.
is especially important postpartum. And remembering those of you that are on that are like, my kid is 10, you are still postpartum. Whitney and I are still postpartum.
That's
We are
right.
all, once you have had a baby, you are postpartum forever.
Yep.
And we need to appreciate that and respect that. And even though your fitness will improve, your function will improve, your food, your nutrition, your ability to absorb those nutrients is really key. So when we're talking about food sensitivities and gluten sensitivity, if you have any of these issues that we're speaking about tonight, really don't hesitate to get yourself the information you need to make that change, so that, you know what, when you're going through menopause, or you've gone through menopause, or you're in the early stages, later stages of perimenopause, that all of a sudden you don't wake up and you're like 30 pounds heavier, and your skin texture, your shape stability. In other words,
Hmm.
you don't have shape stability anymore. We have cellulite. Things are hanging. There's no more muscle tone. It's because we're not absorbing our nutrients. Our body
Yeah.
is stressed. Our sex hormones have been tanked because our body has been stressed for so long with sensitivities.
Yeah.
It's another piece to the puzzle. It's not the only piece, but it's a pretty darn big one, because if you're eating the salmon and the garlic every day and you don't know it's just messing up your immune system, you will be causing tissue disruption and not
Yeah.
realize it. So that's really
Absolutely.
powerful. So, all right. So I want to go gluten free. Now I'm
Yes.
listening to all this. I'm like, okay, I need to go gluten free. My whole family is going gluten free. I have no idea how.
Yeah.
What do I do? Like, you have these resources, but what do I do? Where do I start?
Well, the easiest answer, Amy, is you take my course.
Yeah,
It's super cheap.
it is.
You can binge it, and it basically takes you through what I call the 5 stages. The first stage is getting everyone on board, getting everyone in the same emotional place of being ready for this shift, right? And then going through and taking care of the food, your pantry, your refrigerator. Then you have to think about all of the places in the kitchen where you're going to get cross contaminated. There's all kinds of kitchenwares that you're going to need to replace when you shift to a gluten-free kitchen, right? We're talking about cutting boards and wooden spoons and all kinds of places that are prone to microabrasions, right? And to harboring these
Mhm.
proteins. Then you have to go outside the kitchen and you have to look in your bathroom cabinet, your medicine cabinet, your makeup bag, right? Because wheat and gluten are everywhere. And then there are these oddball places like certain orthodontia equipment, retainers, okay? Who doesn't
Mhm.
have a kid with retainer, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's a source of gluten exposure. And then once you get your house safe, then you have to think about, all right, now I've eliminated the gluten. Now I need to start healing the damage that gluten caused. Because the way I look at it and how I try and talk to my clients about it is, if your house is burning down, you got to put out the fire. That's the first step, right?
Mhm.
That's what getting rid of gluten is. It's just putting out the house fire. That's it. Once the fire is out, now it's time to assess the damage and to repair the damage. If you miss that critical step, then you're kind of working from a deficit for the rest of your life moving forward.
And that's where working with someone really helps. Like,
Yeah.
it's so complex, and this is not intended to just be a pitch for anything,
No,
but
no, no.
really giving you the information on the education. And I am
Hmm.
such a believer in getting the right information, and this
Yeah.
is the right information. If you have a child with type 1 diabetes, or if you have a
Hmm.
child with learning issues or eczema right now and they're
Hmm.
9, then be prepared for them to have a lot of trouble with acne in their teen years. And
Yes.
coming from a teen with acne, if I could have done anything to have prevented that in myself, I would have done everything, because it's so traumatizing. So just these
Right.
changes now is such a powerful impact. Or if you're struggling with your weight, or if you have prolapse, or if you have pelvic floor dysfunction, honestly, I mean, you feel like it's a
Absolutely.
stretch, but it's not, because it's all tied in. I mean, celiac disease is one of the biggest drivers of pelvic pain and pelvic floor dysfunction. Did you know
Absolutely.
that? It's one
Absolutely.
of the biggest drivers. And you don't have to be diagnosed with celiac disease. You can have gluten sensitivity and not
Yeah.
have celiac disease and still have these pain patterns. So
Yes.
we know that glowing gluten free is not enough. We get the house gluten free. We're doing our gluten free products, but then there's a whole nother stage to it after that, and it's rebuilding. Then what do I eat? And
Yeah.
that's where again there you can do this. I mean, there's plenty to eat outside of gluten-free
Absolutely.
products, and
Yes.
we could do a whole nother live. And if you guys are interested on doing that, like what, okay, I really, now if we have a good population that says I want to go gluten-free, if you're listening and you'd like that, maybe then if Whitney's available, we can have you back
Sure.
on and talk about what do I do now? Like, what do I eat? How do I build my body? What are
Mhm.
some strategies, some quick hitters that we can, because it's none of it's quick, but some starting points, some launching off points that makes it less daunting, because there's a whole nother
Absolutely.
ball game after you get over that initial hurdle. That's what a coach helps you with, but it would be fun to do a live on that also.
That'd be great.
One final question that has come in: will
Yeah.
going gluten free help me sleep? Because my sleep has been terrible.
Yeah.
Will it help me sleep?
Well, I mean, it's hard, as you know, Amy. It's hard to draw a straight line between one cause and one effect, but absolutely. So if you are gluten sensitive, right? Um, and sensitive really to anything, but let's just say specifically gluten sensitive, and over 35% of the population is gluten sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are, that sets off an inflammatory cascade in the body that is pretty much pervasive because you're consuming that food every single day. That is going to disrupt your adrenal pattern, your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, right? So that is going to impact your sleep. It also impacts your liver function. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And between 1 and 3 in the morning is the prime time for the liver to kind of do all of its nighttime work. Well, if you've got some liver congestion due to these immunoglobulins and immune complexes circulating, you are going to have some sleep disruption, right? So there are ways in which any food sensitivity, but certainly gluten, can impact your sleep, particularly when you're sensitive. So when you eliminate that, you're going to decrease inflammation, you're going to stabilize the blood sugar, you're going to stabilize that stress response, and you're going to start to reduce liver congestion. And those are the things that are ultimately impacting your sleep, and they can be caused by a gluten sensitivity, right? But you
Yeah.
can't draw a straight line between, oh, I eat this piece of cake, I'm not going to sleep at night, right? That's not the way it works. It's disrupting other systems in your body that are impacting your sleep.
Right. Wow, this has been amazing, Whitney. I'm so, thrilled to have had you on. Now, if people are watching and they're like, I really want to work with you, I need some help. I want,
Yeah.
other than those links, are you taking clients right now, or do you have any space available?
I do. I usually take 3 clients a month,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a couple of different programs. I have my classic gluten gauntlet system for those people who, they really are serious about healing all of the damage that gluten has done in their life and making sure that they're cleaning up their environment. And also, I do tend to specialize in women with Hashimoto's, so I also have my thyroid reboot program. But those are my private coaching plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
But another way to kind of get the flavor of working with me, like I was saying, is take my course, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's $127. Your folks are going to get a $50 promo code, $50 reduction on that, and
Wow.
get the first lesson for free if you just want to try it out, right? So try it out, and when you take the course, there are tasks throughout the course, and there are forms you can fill out. You can give me feedback, and we can actually instant message through the portal, right? So you can get a little bit of a sense of what it might be like to actually work with me, and you're learning how to go gluten free in the right way.
Right. That's so fantastic. And Allison asked, where are you located? Arizona, right?
Yeah. I'm in
Yeah.
Arizona. I work virtually. I have clients all over the country. I even work with some international folks. You can find me at morgannutrition.com. That's my
Mm-hmm.
website. I'm on Instagram, Morgan Nutrition 24. I'm here on Facebook, Morgan
Yeah.
Nutrition. So pretty easy to find.
Yes, and I have all of her links are in there, Allison. And if you need help, I can send you a message and direct you to Whitney's work. Well, this has been so fantastic, and I've learned a ton. And just thank you so much for your time tonight. And we'll be
My
sure to
pleasure.
connect again and
Yeah.
go to that next step and find out when, what we can do next after the gluten is done. So, thanks a lot, and
You're welcome.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So nice to spend time with you guys.
Okay, you guys have a good night. We'll see you next time.
Bye.